All right, this is the copyright disclaimer. The copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Fair use, fair use, fair use.
They Were Her Property by Stephanie Jones Rogers. White women slave owners in the American South. You don't hear much about this, right? Because many people who pretend to be our allies are often the same people, the exact same people who profited off of our enslavement. And when I say us and our, I mean Black Americans, or foundational Black Americans in particular. And if you haven't read the book by Stephanie Jones Rogers, I would seriously suggest you go pick it up, because what she found was factual historical evidence that white women participated in the slave trade and were just as brutal, and in some cases more brutal, than the men. And she even points out that Black Americans were given as gifts, like puppies, to little white children as young as 9 months old. They treated us like puppies, like party gifts. So yes, white women, it's not just the white men who were the problem there.
Did you know 40% of slave owners were white women? Yeah. You know who doesn't know that? White women.
In fact, the historian Stephanie Jones Rogers, in her recent book from 2019, They Were Her Property, documents through historical records how white women actually were slave owners, often because their father had died and bequeathed enslaved people to them, or they married a man who had enslaved people and they were co-owners with him. And part of what she documents from the narration of formerly enslaved people is that the white women who were slave owners were especially cruel in their treatment of their enslaved property. And part of the reason that she speculates this is that there was a kind of desire to prove their worth, right, as a worthy slave owner.
Less than 2% of white Americans own slaves.
White women shock us, because we're assuming that their oppression as women, their gender oppression, will allow for them to kind of set aside the benefits of white supremacy and white privilege and embrace alliances across the color line. And when we don't see that happening, it's really perplexing. But I think this book really shows us and tells us why that might not happen when we expect it.
Click the link in the bio to get the book.
They Were Her Property, narrated by Black Kingdom. Full video coming soon.
Period. White men with whips, white men on plantations, white men in power. That story is familiar, it's comfortable, and it is incomplete, because America itself is a crime scene built on human trafficking. Millions of black bodies bought, sold, bred, and broken to construct a nation that still calls itself free. And when we talk about that crime scene, we keep our eyes fixed in one direction. We point to the men. But a crime of this scale doesn't survive on muscle alone. It survives on accounting, on deeds, on household ledgers, on cultivated silence. It survives because entire groups are allowed to remain in obscurity. Today, that ends, because it is time to push white women out of the shadows of mythology and into the grim record of America's greatest sins, not as spectators, not as powerless figures trapped by history, but as owners, managers, and enforcers of human bondage. This is not about shock, it's about truth, and truth does not flinch. For generations, America wrapped white women in the costume of innocence, the Southern belle, delicate, moral, harmless. That image wasn't history, it was cover, because the records tell a different story. White women bought enslaved people, they sold them, they inherited them like land or furniture. In many southern states, a third, sometimes nearly half, of slave transactions listed women as buyers or sellers. For countless white women, enslaved black people were the largest source of wealth they ever controlled. Slavery wasn't happening around them. It was happening through them. Take Maria Epps, wife of a Mississippi planter. Enslaved people remembered her clearly. She ordered punishments. She controlled labor. She disciplined enslaved women herself. Her authority rested on one truth she made clear again and again. I own you. Ownership is not abstract. Ownership is power enforced by violence. Maria Epps was not rare, she was typical. Then there was Martha Gibbs. Not famous, not dramatic. She appears in probate records as an ordinary slaveholder. Ordinary. She represents the thousands who ran households where black people labored every day under female supervision. They decided who worked, who ate, who was punished.
Would one day be under the authority of the very mistresses who hated the sight of them. The humiliation festered into cruelty, and when the masters were away, sometimes for weeks or months, the loneliness and resentment turned into something darker. Some mistresses sought revenge, not on their husbands, but on the enslaved men and boys who had no power to refuse them. While far less common than the predatory acts of white masters, these relationships did happen, and when they did, they were almost always acts of coercion, a power play in which refusal wasn't an option. Captain Richard Hinton recorded cases of mistresses forcing enslaved men into sexual submission, and Harriet Jacobs hinted at the same in her testimony. These women understood the position they held, that they had over the enslaved the same total control their own fathers once had over them. That made it frighteningly easy for them to single out the most vulnerable, the most powerless, the most brutalized, and take what they wanted. In the public eye, they were the symbols of Christian virtue, the glue that held the household together, guardians of morality. But behind closed doors, some shattered every value they pretended to uphold. The plantation was a place where every human relationship, even the most intimate, was poisoned by the rot of slavery. And the white mistress, so often painted as a victim in popular memory, was sometimes one of its most calculating predators. Adultery in the 1800s was dangerous, especially for women. A wife caught in an affair could be ruined, shunned, or even punished by law. And yet, white women in the South were celebrated as perfect examples of morality and purity, the angels of the home. At least, that's the image society wanted to believe. Step onto a Southern plantation, however, and that image shatters instantly. The truth was uglier, dirtier, and far more disturbing than polite history admits. To truly understand the filth at the core of slavery, you'd have to put yourself in the skin of an enslaved black person. Only then would you see past the lies, and into a world where the souls of the so-called civilized seemed to have rotted away. White women of high social rank preached about chastity, claiming they were morally superior to black women. But in secret, some of these same women pursued sexual relationships with enslaved black men. They justified it by clinging to ideas of their own superiority, and by venting their personal frustrations on people they could control. Sometimes these encounters led to pregnancies. When that happened, everything had to be hidden to avoid scandal. We've all heard the grim truth about white masters raping enslaved black women, but what about the mistresses, the respectable plantation wives, who forced themselves on enslaved black men? In this episode, we're pulling back the curtain on the bizarre, shocking, and hidden intimate lives of white mistresses on the plantation. Life for these women was a twisted mix of privilege and bitterness. In the social hierarchy of the plantation, they were second only to their husbands. And with that power came control over the lives of the enslaved. They ordered the work, dealt out punishments, and sometimes took sadistic pleasure in using their authority to humiliate others. A female slave could be flogged for the smallest offense, a dropped plate, a look that was taken as disrespect. Others were punished by being forced to stand in the blistering southern sun for hours, skin burning, body weakening, with no water, no mercy. Every part of plantation life was designed to strip away humanity, to crush the spirit. The former slave Harriet Jacobs, in her searing memoir Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, described growing up in a world drenched in sexual danger and fear, a place where slave girls were stalked by the desires of white men and watched with suspicion and jealousy by white women. These mistresses were trapped in their own way, married off at 15 or 16, expected to be dutiful, smiling, obedient wives, but their cages were lined with gold. They might have been bound by social rules, but they were still powerful over the enslaved, and many of them knew exactly how to use that power. Their husbands' constant affairs with enslaved women produced children who were enslaved themselves, some of whom would one day be under the authority of the very mistresses who hated the sight of them. The humiliation festered into cruelty, and when the masters were away, sometimes for weeks or months, the loneliness and resentment turned into something darker. Some mistresses sought revenge, not on their husbands, but on the enslaved men and boys who had no power to refuse them, while far less common than the predatory acts of white marriage with slaves gifted by their parents. And although, in law, a wife's property belonged to her husband, the reality was more complicated. Some mistresses fiercely guarded control over their slaves. Former slave Silas Glenn recalled how his mistress treated the slaves she inherited from her father better than the ones from her husband's side, and how she wouldn't let her husband manage or sell them. For women who had grown up owning slaves, the idea of themselves as masters was part of their identity. They knew the business. Some became skilled traders. Mrs. Annie Poor, for example, sold slaves for high prices after training them in valuable trades like cooking and carpentry. She studied market prices, exploited changes in demand, and even attended slave auctions herself, or sent trusted agents to bid for her. These women were not just figureheads. They were active, ruthless participants in the slave economy. Some gained wealth, independence, and social influence in a world designed to keep women powerless, and they did it by crushing the lives of the people they owned. On the plantation, power came at a cost, and for the enslaved, that cost was everything. Most people assume that if white mistresses saw the sexual abuse of enslaved women, they might have felt pity. The reality, often it was the opposite. Trapped under the suffocating rules of female purity and unable to stop their husband's abuse, many mistresses turned a blind eye, or worse, took out their anger on the very victims who suffered most. Mistress Mary Boykin Chestnut, for example, could call slavery a wrong and an inequity because of the sexual chaos it caused. Yet in the same breath, she labeled enslaved women as prostitutes. She managed to paint herself as the only true victim, while showing almost no sympathy for the women actually being assaulted. Many mistresses clung to racist lies about black women being animalistic, hypersexual, and somehow complicit in their own abuse. Boykin Chestnut even claimed to feel faint watching a mixed-race woman sold for sexual purposes, but then described the woman as grinning seductively at bidders, as if she welcomed it. On smaller plantations, where mistresses couldn't escape seeing their husbands' affairs, the cruelty became personal. Their jealousy and humiliation often exploded into violence. Solomon Northup, in his autobiography, born of these affairs, became more than just shameful reminders. For some mistresses, they became tools. In a twisted way, having these children gave the mistress a sense of power she couldn't get from her own marriage. It was a dangerous game, one that constantly risked public disgrace. But it was also a stark reminder that life on a plantation was a tangled knot of power, abuse, and deep prejudice. Plantation wives were supposed to be pure, loving, and loyal to their husbands. In reality, many were deeply bitter. Just like the slaves, they were technically the property of their husbands, men who could exploit them sexually just as they did the enslaved women. Their freedom was tightly controlled. They rarely traveled without a male escort, and under Southern slave codes, their authority over enslaved people was written directly into law. The Low Country slave codes, like those in South Carolina, spelled it out. Slaves who fled their master or mistress could be castrated. If they tried to escape again, they could be mutilated further. Another law from 1740 even warned that if a master or mistress failed to provide food, clothing, or shelter for the enslaved, they could be held legally responsible. In Georgia, the law threatened fines for any master, mistress, or overseer who allowed a slave to work without official permission. Slave laws used gender-neutral language on purpose, because women were just as capable of being masters as men, and they were. Because colonial life was dangerous and unstable, many male heads of households died young, leaving widows in charge. Some of these women gained huge economic power through slave ownership. They didn't just inherit slaves. They bought, sold, rented out, and even willed them to others. This gave them financial influence and social standing that few women had, but they knew the system was stacked against them. The Southern patriarchy hated the idea of women having independence. So to protect their position, these women fiercely upheld the very racist system that gave them power in the first place. Single women with slaves clung to their authority. Wealthy brides often came into marriage with slaves. Boykin Chestnut even claimed to feel faint watching a mixed-race woman sold for sexual purposes, but then described the woman as grinning seductively at bidders, as if she welcomed it. On smaller plantations, where mistresses couldn't escape seeing their husbands' affairs, the cruelty became personal. Their jealousy and humiliation often exploded into violence. Solomon Northup, in his autobiography, wrote of Patsy, a young enslaved woman who was whipped mercilessly at her mistress's command. The mistress urged her husband or other slaves to flog Patsy out of spite, and once even tried to bribe Northup to kill her. This wasn't emotional outburst. It was terror, unpredictable and constant, a different kind of torture that left deep scars on the mind as well as the body. Mistresses also found ways to exploit enslaved women's motherhood. Scholars Emily West and Rosie J. Knight have shown how mistresses used the market for wet nurses to their advantage, turning enslaved women's bodies into tools for their own convenience. Sometimes it was because they were sick, sometimes it was pure vanity, the belief that breastfeeding would make their own breasts sag and lose beauty. Harriet Jacobs remembered her own mother being forced to stop nursing her at just 3 months old so the mistress's baby could get enough milk. For the mistress, it was a simple choice. For the enslaved mother, it meant giving up feeding her own child so another woman's baby could thrive. It was a gendered cruelty, one that mixed motherhood with exploitation. Mistresses interfered in enslaved women's pregnancies and births too, choosing midwives, deciding where births would happen, even administering remedies. On the surface, this might look like care, but in reality, a healthy slave child was an investment, another body to work or sell. Motherhood was not a shared bond across racial lines. It was a business decision. And it wasn't just women who were targeted. Some white mistresses also took sexual advantage of enslaved men. Historian Thomas Balcerski notes that while rare, these relationships revealed just how clearly mistresses understood the plantation's hierarchy and how easily they could twist it to their benefit. Harriet Jacobs described one such case, a mistress who chose an meant giving up feeding her own child so another woman's baby could thrive. It was a gendered cruelty, one that mixed motherhood with exploitation. Mistresses interfered in enslaved women's pregnancies and births too, choosing midwives, deciding where births would happen, even administering remedies. On the surface, this might look like care, but in reality, a healthy slave child was an investment, another body to work or sell. Motherhood was not a shared bond across racial lines. It was a business decision. And it wasn't just women who were targeted. Some white mistresses also took sexual advantage of enslaved men. Historian Thomas Balcerski notes that while rare, these relationships revealed just how clearly mistresses understood the plantation's hierarchy and how easily they could twist it to their benefit. Harriet Jacobs described one such case, a mistress who chose an enslaved man precisely because he was utterly powerless. His inability to refuse was the very reason she picked him. It was domination disguised as choice, an intimate violation made possible by the racial and social order. Even daily life carried a quiet, disturbing undercurrent. Enslaved men often worked shirtless in the southern heat, their bodies constantly visible to the plantation's elite women. Sometimes it stirred curiosity, other times it was simply accepted as normal, but for certain mistresses, the sight became part of the power play. They demanded massages, personal services, and sometimes even used threats to keep their desires secret, warning enslaved men that if they told, she could accuse them of rape and have them destroyed. On the plantation, intimacy was never free. It was a weapon, and in the hands of a mistress, it could be just as sharp, just as destructive as any whip. Just as white men used racist lies to excuse their abuse, white mistresses also learned how to twist those same stereotypes for their own ends. They took the long-standing, poisonous link society had made between blackness and sexual danger and turned it into a weapon. These women, often seen as powerless in a man's world, found their own disturbing form of power by exploiting the most vulnerable bodies around them. History is full of these overlooked stories. Stories that break apart the myths we've been fed and expose the raw, unsettling truths beneath. And there are many more waiting in the shadows, ready to be uncovered.
This is the book of Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 10, and it reads, For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Raha HaKakwadash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on the highways and byways. Also salutations to the hopeful elect of the scattered 12 tribes of Israel, scattered to the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, also known as your Israelite foreigners, and your so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. To you, I say Shalom. This is your brother Ayashar Barzal, coming back at you with another lesson that is edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. And this is another installment of our camp series, For Thy Violence Against Thy Brother Jacob. This one will be a little different. No article this time. There was a stitch of several videos that just prove, that Esau, the so-called white man, was not alone in his treachery against Jacob. That so-called white woman, the Edomite woman, the red Hebrew Edomite men and women, that woman had a lot to do with the demise of Jake. She destroyed a lot of communities, but the focus here is on the what they did in slavery, and that book that's out. They were her property. They were 40% of the slave owners. 40%, and had a whole lot to do with the demise of Jake. Casual Killing Act, which is kind of what the police forces run off of today. They legally have the right to destroy Jake, kill Jake, through the course of correction. Go figure. But it says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. So all of your history is being revealed. Okay, all of it. We're only, I think this is video number 215. You'll know by the time I post it. But 215, and there's a lot more to cover. We really haven't scratched the surface, and these are the things that we know that were written about. But that Edomite woman, so-called white woman, had a huge role in the slave trade. They kind of show you that in I think the movie Mandingo, where white women were actually part of the auctions. Okay, slave auctions. So the thing is, right along with her man, she will be held accountable for her actions as well, for the violence against Jacob. And like the scripture said, they're going to be cut off forever, That's in the 18th verse of the same book, There should be no more remaining of the house of Esau. All right? And that demise is going to come at the hands. Let me go ahead and read it. Obadiah 1 and 18. It says, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire, Jacob being the southern kingdom, and the house of Joseph a flame, Joseph being the northern kingdom, and the house of Esau for stubble. Esau is the so-called white man. All right. And they, that's the Jacob and Joseph, northern and southern kingdom, shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for Yahweh Bashem Yahushai has spoken it. And we know, according to the Lord's word, once he gives it, it does not return to him vain. So these devils are going to be done away with. All right. And once again, as you saw in the clips, the woman will not go unpunished. All right. This is the book of Numbers 14 and 18. And it reads, the Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Okay? This says the guilty, will not be cleared from what they've done. None whatsoever. Just like the men are going to have to pay, you wicked Edomite women are going to have to pay too. You're going to be destroyed right along with the man, like I said in Obadiah 1 and 18. All right? But that's after you fulfill your servitude for 1,000 years. Okay? And you will do that. Thus saith the scriptures. Twice as long as twice as hard. That's in Revelation chapter 18, verses 5 and 6. All right? So you will not be held guiltless. You know, no matter how much you're choosing Jake over your own men right now. All right? You knew they were worse the whole time. But they use you as a pedestal. All right? This is the book of Psalms. Chapter 109. I'm going to start at verses 1 and 2 just to give you context. And then jump down to verse 12. Okay? It's just talking about Esau, Edom, who is the wicked, according to Malachi 1 and 4. Psalms 109, verse 1, and it reads, to the chief musician, a psalm of David, hold not thy peace, O power of my praise. Verse 2, for the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are open against me. Okay? Who's that talking about? Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. He is the wicked. All right? According to Malachi 1 and 4. All right? And the mouth of the deceitful, that's him as well too. You know, the Lord said the deceived and the deceiver are his. All right? The deceived is Jacob. The deceiver is Esau. Okay? I'll start again at verse 2. For the mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are open against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. And that's what you do. You know, like that video said, you know, if that so-called white woman didn't get her way, you know, and it looked like she was going to be embarrassed, she would lie on the slave, you know, getting whipped and or killed. All right. Jumping down to verse 12 through 16. Straight to the point. All right. And it says, let there be none to extend mercy unto him, neither let there be any to favor his fatherless children. That's talking about Esau, Edom. No one extending mercy unto you. Okay? No one. Like the also says in Obadiah, you know, that the Lord has made you small amongst the heathen. Thou art to be greatly despised. All right? And that's where you are right now. Nobody in the world likes the so-called white man, but the so-called white man. All right? And he knows, you know. And Amalek, you people over in the Holy Land right now, you know, you're of the same nation of Edom. You're the tribe of Amalek, point blank period. All right? It says verse 13, Psalms 109, verse 13. It says, let his posterity be cut off. And that word posterity means from the progenitor of a nation to the furthest descendant of a generation. Okay? So, and he says, let it be cut off. That means to be no longer existent. All right? It says, and in the generation following, let their name be blotted out. So yeah, you're going to be removed from history, just as you have been trying to remove Jake as of late. Removed from history, totally altogether. Nothing around you is going to exist. Okay? Nothing that you establish is going to exist anymore. All right? It says in verse 14, let the iniquity of his fathers be remembered with Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. All right? So like I said in Numbers 14, you so-called white women, you got to pay for those sins too that your foremothers committed, if that's what you want to call them. Okay? You have to pay too. All right. Verse 15. Let them be before Yahweh Bashem Yahushai continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth. Do you understand what that means? Cut the memory of you all from the earth. You will no longer be remembered. Okay? Your wickedness will be gone along with you. All right? And why is that? It says, because thou hast remembered not to show mercy, but persecuted the poor and needy man, that he might even slay the broken. All right? The poor, the persecuted, and the needy man are all the Israelites. Slakia. Okay? That's what it's telling you. Okay? You're gonna be cut off because of that. And you want to slay the broken in heart. That word heart meaning the mind. La'ab, Hebrew word la'ab, meaning the mind. Okay? You didn't show any mercy. So now you have to pay. All right? Just like we did. But in righteousness. All right? Verse 17. As he loved cursing, so let it come unto him. As he delighted not in blessing, so let it be far from him. All right? So yeah, that blessing, you turned it down in Genesis 25. You sold it. Okay? That's it. There's no more. You know, that was proven in Genesis 27, where you begged Isaac for a blessing. You know, you got it, but it's not like the one that Jacob has, which is what you're trying to get now. All right? The everlasting kingdom, and it's not going to happen. All right? So yeah, you are going to be taken out and not to rise again. All right? So let's get that in Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah 14, beginning at verse 21. And it reads, prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers. That's exactly, or pretty much almost verbatim what I read to you in Numbers 14 and 18. All right? It says that they do not possess, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. So when you go down, this is it this time. No more rising up. No more building any more buildings. Okay? None of that. Going into slavery. All right? Verse 22. And it reads, for I will rise up against them, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahushai of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and the remnant and the son and and son and nephew, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. I'll read that again. Isaiah 14 and 22. For I will rise up against them, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahushai of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name, the remnant, and son, and nephew, saith the Lord. Okay? So that's the whole seed line. The whole, entire seed line. You know? You're through, Esau, Edom. All right, for everything that you've done to Jake. Everything. You know, it will be brought into remembrance. All right, so with that, I hope this lesson was edifying to the elect body of the nation of Israel. Once again, I'm going to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Raha Kakodash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well in teaching me this 100% truth. Salutations to them and my fellow Akim who labor in this truth week in and week out on highways and byways. All right. Shalom. Kwam Yasharallah. Abba Ball. we got next. All right, shalom.